Mini episode 723 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Welcome, everyone, to mini episode number 723 of the FDH Lounge. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris. I have with me one of my fellow FDH Lounge original dignitaries today, FDH Senior Editor Jason Jones, who is our draft expert. He is in charge of our top 75 overall rankings, our player rankings at the different positions. Jason is our resident draftnik, as he is for the NBA. And so, again, it is his expertise that we defer to today, because what we have to discuss, we have the FDH player rankings from this draft. We have the list that is based purely off of the top 75 overall on a point system, how teams did at acquiring those players. Additionally, we have a list of players, again, how everything lined up according to need, according to did you get a great player and was it at a position of need? And again, great players kind of a sliding scale. The higher up they were on the top 75, the greater they were. And we rated teams higher in terms of filling the stiffest need going down to the least problematic area of need on our short list for every team on there. So we devised a formula for each of these two. Jason got it in his grubby hands a couple of hours ago, and we are going to break this down. Again, my man, Jason Jones, FDH Senior Editor, here today to discuss the 2016 NFL Draft. Jason, thanks for taking the time, buddy. Good to get you on the phone lines, and I think this is going to be very fascinating as we start to get into what happened and why.
Tell you what, we haven't enjoyed a draft like this in quite some time.
We haven't, and probably, I would say, ever by certain standards. So let's start there. Let's start with the one thing that nobody saw coming, the hand grenade in everybody's mock draft, when you were talking about arguably the best player in the draft, and the guy who was number one on your top 75 overall, and the guy becoming, as they might say, persona au gratin, and sliding all the way to 13, I was very, very distressed, I have to tell you, on Twitter. Yeah. I jumped in there immediately and made the joke about the Dolphins leaking the video, whereupon I start seeing all these other wannabe comedians making the joke and not crediting me. Like, what the hell is going on here? So, aside from that, I've always said the Dolphins are my 1A team, so I'm liking the value on the pick. I'm a little bit queasy in terms of this kid apparently is not the brightest bulb, according to some of the things going on here. Other angles, too, copping to potentially taking money. If you're Hugh Freeze and you've accompanied the kid to the draft and then later on he's kind of like, oh, yeah, maybe I took a little money from them. You know, the whole thing is really kind of a clown show. But tell me what your thoughts were as you were watching it all play out.
Well, I'll be honest with you, it felt like I was missing some information. Because, you know, I had heard about the photo or the video. And then you're watching it and going, okay, I get it, but come on. I mean, they're trying to compare this guy like if coached properly and dedication and all that, this guy could potentially be a poor man's Jonathan Ogden. You don't let that guy fall. Now, apparently it is what it is, and it literally did come down to teams were scared about that video because they couldn't vet it. In such short time, you had no way to find out, was it him? Is this a pattern? Is this just, an outlier, one bad choice? And hopefully it is the latter of those options. But I was absolutely blown away. And then finally I just jumped on Twitter and started hashtagging Laramie Tunsil and, gas mask and all that and thought, okay, this guy sabotaged his own situation, or maybe, and not to downplay your joke, but I thought, is it possible, since he filed a lawsuit earlier in the week, that Tunsil's father could have been responsible for this? And of course, we got a denial pretty quickly after the first round ended. But absolutely the worst thing that could have happened to an otherwise perceived blue chipper. However, it is interesting to note that the Ravens had Stanley ahead of them anyway, and then took him off their board completely, who I really thought he was going to get if he got through the top three.
Well, the funny thing is, too, I know that with some of the interests that you have and that I have, maybe this has already crossed your mind, but I started thinking about this, like, there's got to be some kind of screenplay in this thing here. You know, so right before a draft, I mean, that is one of the ultimate acts of sabotage, of somebody being out to get somebody, make their draft stock fall. And, again, some talk that there had been kind of a blackmail scenario surrounding the kid, that apparently he had gotten some threats going into the draft. He may have known that this was coming. He may have been tipped off that, you know, if you don't do such and such, this will be coming. But, again, it was funny because where I was watching the draft, initially it was on the NFL Network, and then subsequently they flipped over to ESPN. But I got to tell you, the palpable discomfort on the NFL Network. I am not one of these conspiracy theorists, like, they don't want to talk about anything bad surrounding their sport. I mean, yeah, they do a lot of puffball stuff, no question about it.
Yeah.
But a story like this, in real time, they recognize their ability to control the situation and that the league is looking kind of dumb. I don't think the league looked any better by Roger Goodell afterwards, playing up the whole reality TV aspect of it, of this is what makes things entertaining and exciting. You know, I realize it's a no-win situation, but his answer to that, trying to spin it as though it were a plus, was maybe the most absurd angle of the whole story.
Yeah, there's really no good way to do this. I mean, if you're either in the commissioner's spot, you know, someone actually producing the draft telecast, or, God forbid, one of the anchors on the desk with this big cloud hanging over them, knowing that there's no way on earth they're going to be permitted to really discuss it candidly. There's really it's a no-win situation. So for me, personally, as a viewer, and knowing what's going on and having the ability to cut through what's, you know, fluff and what's, you know, genuine, I would have preferred they just didn't address it at all. Just, even Roger, just let it go. Just pretend the elephant's not in the room, because there's no way you make it better by speaking on it.
Right. I think we all learned that. I will say, for what it's worth, in the sort of 11th hour before the channel was flipped where I was at, props to Rich Eisen for getting off the Cheech and Chong joke, because he's at least the one guy at that network who's got the stones, and I would say the power behind him to be able to get away with a joke like that. So that was kind of funny. It was good to see somebody addressing it in that kind of manner, but the way that it all played out subsequently, there were some surprises early, and we knew it was going to be a big night for Ohio State. We didn't necessarily know that it was going to be two guys going in the top four, just because, again, there were so many candidates to go in those spots there. Joey Bosa going 3, where a lot of us seem to think, you and me in particular going in, Laramie Tunsil might be going there. Was that a last-minute adjustment based on the video, or was Bosa really their guy? We'll never know, because they'll never admit it if Tunsil was the choice, and they'll never convince us that Bosa was the choice all along, even if he was. Ezekiel Elliott going number 4. You and I talked about this ahead of time. It makes too much sense not to happen. What's very interesting is that Jerry Jones, you would not tend to think that he's going to have the better opinion than the scouting staff. But this is one where apparently he did, because he wanted Elliott. The staff wanted Ramsey. And, again, they couldn't have gone wrong with Ramsey, because he's such a difference maker defensively. There was no bad decision to be made. But when you're talking about a guy that, as a rookie, I keep saying this, he could get 2,000 yards behind that line. I got to believe they did the right thing. But, again, Bosa and Elliott 3 and 4, that was really kind of a surprise to me, because both of them were thought maybe to be slipping to the latter part of the top 10. It just kind of shows you how elastic things were early on.
Well, yeah, and these are two teams in two spots in the top 5 that had a lot of ammunition to move down if they wanted to, and there was a lot riding on it. Yet these are also two teams that, you know, didn't take a whole lot of digging to discover that there could have been choices made that we might have not predicted. I think everybody, as of the Browns trading out of the 2 spot, from that moment, I'm pretty sure the entire world figured it was going to go Goff, Wentz, Tunsil. And I'm sure you can make the argument for Bosa, But the value for Tunsil and them needing to get the most out of Philip Rivers for the next 3 to 5 years, however long they've got him, it just made sense. So for the Chargers to go Bosa right there and try to tell us that he was their guy all along, he may have been, but if he was, that was the best kept secret in this entire process. So there's that. On the other side of it, yeah, we can talk Ramsey. You could have mentioned Bosa if he was still there at 4. I know that, every sports pundit in the country leading up to, the first pick of the draft was trying to sell us a bill of goods that the Dallas Cowboys were going to draft a defensive lineman because they were going to be without their 2 starting defensive linemen for 4 games. And one thing that just drives me absolutely insane is the notion that you draft somebody in the first round for short-term gain. You just don't do that. So with that aside, there is absolutely no way that anyone should have thought that the Ezekiel Elliott notion was not only plausible, but probably what they should have done. Now, I was going back between Bosa and Ramsey just because I didn't think they were going to do it. You were hearing it was Stephen Jones and staff versus Jerry. And again, Jerry won, and I think you're absolutely right. With that offensive line, they've built that team in a way that all they had to do was wait for the right running back, the right skill set, and I think he's going to absolutely, maybe not rookie year, but I think very, very soon he's going to blow out of the water what we saw from DeMarco Murray in his rushing leading season a couple years ago.
I agree. And Pete Prisco, not surprisingly, with a very hot take that, OMG, you don't take a running back in that spot. And so I look forward to seeing him slag on somebody for taking Leonard Fournette in the top 5 next year. So I'm sure he's going to keep beating that drum regardless of whatever Elliott does this year, even if he goes off like you and I are saying. Again, that huge night for Ohio State with, I believe, 6 guys in the first round, it was very, very interesting because when you're looking at the media capital of the world, New York, both of the teams there ending up taking guys from that defense from the 2014 national champions. You had to be surprised, as I was, at the Giants taking Eli Apple 10. You and I both had him going, I think, 25. That was a surprise. That was not a value pick, to be sure. Number 20, Darren Lee to the Jets. That, on the other hand, to me seemed like a pretty good one. That's about the range where I was seeing him go. I immediately, just to kind of tweak our friend, FDH Lounge dignitary Russ Cohen, I immediately, who's a Jets fan, I immediately texted him, second coming of Vernon Golston, just to kind of stick it to him. And then I texted back, just kidding, I think he's going to be fine. And I got to tell you, Russ is feeling the paranoia about Vernon Golston with this Lee pick here. But what were your thoughts on those 2 guys? The Apple thing is hard to justify on value, but as far as the impact that each of them may bring to their respective defenses, it does seem like they've made big upgrades by bringing those guys in.
Well, let me just start. He was the first strictly corner off the board, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's strike number 1. Because I don't care who you are or what you're looking at. If you wanted corner, and I've been saying this throughout this entire process, Jalen Ramsey is an incredible talent. He is not an elite corner. He is a great defensive back that gives you versatility and all that's great. The best corner in this entire draft, without question, is Vernon Hargreaves. Without question. Now, Eli Apple is 6 foot plus. He's got the measurables. He's got the 40 time, and that's great. And as an Ohio State fan, I hate saying this, but he's got some really ugly tape. He's got some games that he does not look good. And that's not the guy you take in the top 10. And if you remember, if you go back to the Joe Hayden draft, I liked him as a prospect, but I thought it's not spot on enough to be top 10. So with those things said, the Giants reached. They can deny it all they want to, but they did. If that's their guy, so be it. You and I would probably argue if that's their guy, then, trade the hell back, but waste draft capital. But as far as Darren Lee, I knew he was going to go middle first. I just also knew the Atlanta Falcons were in love with him. So I pretty much just slotted him at Atlanta the entire time because I didn't think he'd go any higher than that. So we'll see what happens. He looks like a very dynamic pro prospect. So with all that being said, I think both of them are reaches. I think Darren Lee is a little bit more excusable. And if Eli Apple was the Giants' guy, then, they got their guy. But dare we go back to the Marv Levy Buffalo drafts and say, This is not how you do well. Stop doing that. Get value. That's the important part.
Yeah, lest anyone doubt that we have been even-handed in this over the years. The guy that we have cited as the ultimate example of it, Dante Whitner, who did not justify being, I think it was the 8th pick in the draft, which is where Marv Levy took him, I believe, 10 years ago. How time flies. But that's the example we've been beating the drum about ever since. Before we start to go to our list of FDH winners and losers from the draft here this year, first round, I got to get your thoughts late in the round. In your hometown presently, the defending world champion Broncos filling their spot at quarterback with Paxton Lynch. You look at it and you go, okay, with both, you wonder how much, Elway's going to come out of the front office to lend his 2 cents on this. But because you look at it between Elway and Kubiak, okay, developmentally, it's a pretty good spot for a kid. On the other hand, again, needs work on his footwork, needs work on, the pro game, a lot of different things here. It looks like they're prepared to go into the season with just Sanchez and him. So way to soften the expectations, I would think, coming off of a world championship season. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how this plays out. And, again, for a team that just won the Super Bowl, they're going to be on the hot seat because if this one doesn't pan out, there's still going to be some egg on the face.
Well, let's back up a little bit. There was a consensus locally that John Elway was content going with Sanchez and Trevor Siemian, which most people who watch the NFL have never heard of. But there was also a certain affection for Paxton Lynch. They knew even if they gave away the draft, they probably wouldn't be able to get up to first or second. They really did like Paxton Lynch. And it's kind of similar to some of these Hugh Jackson picks, where you look at it and go, okay, I see what he has, but I also see what he doesn't have. And it's almost as if those two respective head coaches specifically want someone that they can mold, that has the base, and then they can work on the rest of it. There's nothing about Paxton Lynch deficiency-wise that can't be taught. He's got a basic athleticism. His footwork needs a little bit of improvement, not a lot. And his technique, naturally, they're going to want to polish. But make no mistake about it, John Elway and Kubiak, who are basically, been tied at the hip for quite some time, just see this eye to eye. They both like him. So I think they love it. I think the problem was leading up to this, whether we're talking local radio or national news covering it locally, there was just no way they thought that they'd be able to get him because you were hearing everything from 7 to San Francisco all the way down to 20 with the Jets. And I remember thinking on Wednesday, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I said, you know what? I got a hunch. He's gonna get past the Jets. I don't know why. I just feel that he will. If he gets past the Jets, the Broncos are going to trade up. All they have to do is leapfrog Kansas City, and everything just played into Elway's hands exactly the way they were hoping it would. And bottom line is they got their guy. Whether it ends up being the case 5 years from now is yet to be seen. But right now, everyone in Denver is jumping for joy at getting Paxton Lynch.
I had him going to the Jets at 20, so you saw that a little more clearly than I did because I didn't think the Jets were going to pass on him. I have to ask you this in terms of if anyone locally is dismayed about it, because you're saying the consensus seems to be happiness about the selection. But again, the notion that even in the early second round, when you start to look at quarterbacks like Dalton, Kaepernick, et cetera, oddly enough, early second-round quarterbacks have had a much greater track record of success recently than late first-round quarterbacks. Somebody like a Teddy Bridgewater, I guess, sort of proved the exception to that rule. But late first round, if you're not deemed going in the top of the first round, right, you seem to be in kind of no man's land if you're just looking at a statistical profile of who makes it and who doesn't. Anybody there locally going, uh-oh, about that?
You definitely have something to this because if you think over the last, 5 to 8 years or so, there's really not been quarterback selection that came after, say, pick 5, but then ahead of, say, pick 20. And the only evidence you have to look at is Christian Ponder and Jake Locker, because those are guys that you looked at and said they're probably late first round, early second, and then you see teams taking them in the early teens, and you go, what are you doing? And then, as we see it pan out, those weren't smart picks. So, yeah, you either get somebody right at the top in that Cam Newton, Matt Ryan spot, or you sit back and you wait. You take them at the very back end, or you take them in the second round.
Yeah, that's what everybody seems to think is the standard way of doing business anyways, based on the recent track record. Let's look at the perceived winners and losers of this draft this year. We have two different metrics to use. One is just based purely off of a point system, off of your top 75 players overall. So the top 10 with that, you've got Jacksonville number 1, Cleveland 2, Dallas 3, Miami 4, Tampa 5, Buffalo 6, Cincinnati 7, Houston 8, New Orleans 9, and then the tie for 10, oddly enough, with NFC North contemporaries Chicago and Minnesota. If we're just going off of a combination of the best players and filling critical needs, here are your top 10 in that regard off of our rankings. Number 1, Cleveland. Number 2, Cincinnati. 3 was a tie, three-way tie, Buffalo, Dallas, Jacksonville. Number 6, Tennessee. Number 7, Chicago. 8, Houston. 9, Baltimore. 10, Seattle. So your thoughts about the biggest winners of the draft this year, Jason?
I'll tell you what, it's like we stepped into some bizarro world version of ourselves here, because you're talking about Jacksonville and Cleveland coming out on top of this thing, and for great reason. They legitimately did make remarkable picks. The fact that Jacksonville come out of this with Jalen Ramsey and Miles Jack is so offensive on so many levels. But, hey, that's what happens when teams are afraid to take risks on players. That's what's going to happen. And if Jacksonville's willing to sit back and give Jackson time, you got Jack and Dante Fowler on opposite ends of that outside linebacking core. Holy goodness, is that going to be amazing. So, yeah, Jacksonville did a phenomenal job. And despite what Cleveland looks like on the surface, I think they did a remarkable job. I jokingly had posted online earlier today that you give me Coleman, Ogbah, Scooby Wright, and Rashard Higgins from Colorado State, and you can keep the rest, and I'm already happy. So getting all the others on top of that is just crazy. So I think those two did things that either were high star power or fit them perfectly. Now, you and I believe, we're probably on the same page, hoping that if they did trade back, we'd be looking at a Laquan Treadwell situation. However, I do think that Corey Coleman fits what Hugh Jackson wants to do better. So the teams that normally do really well, the Green Bay Packers, the Steelers, the Ravens, not so much, surprisingly enough.
I can understand that because, again, there is that kind of a scenario where it's all based on where you're picking, for one thing, who you're picking. I mean, the Steelers, again, they were a team that scored significantly better, and it's interesting that there was a gap, and I went through and I looked in terms of teams that did a lot better on one side than the other, filling needs or getting top players, because what the Steelers did subsequently there, again, cornerback is always the bleeding wound of that roster, year in and year out. They got to get somebody in there, and, you know, they did this year finally try to address it in the first round and get something done. Artie Burns at Miami, but that was something that, again, on the top 75 was kind of a reach. So they scored out higher at filling needs than they did at getting top players. You've got Jacksonville, again, they scored, I went to look at it to see on this. Jacksonville they had the second biggest differential in the league behind only Miami at the difference between taking top players and filling needs. Well, a lot of what Jacksonville was doing was superfluous. They weren't really filling needs, but they'd spent an off season working on filling some needs. They've already done some of that. And again, as you said, they were getting such great players that I don't know that you could necessarily hold it against them. I mean, if you're scoring number one on best player overall on that ranking of the index, I don't know that we could possibly say that you had a bad draft, regardless of what you did in terms of filling needs. I'll tell you, in terms of the Browns, my sense of them is a little bit more nuanced in terms of what they did than any other team, largely because, again, being based in Cleveland, they are my hometown team. So I have a little bit more of a sense of who I wanted to see, objectives that I had for them. So, again, I am sort of holding them to a different standard than I am other teams because I wanted Treadwell in that spot. I surely would have liked Miles Jack at the top of the second round. There are definitely some things I'm looking at. I'm extraordinarily disappointed at taking a developmental quarterback who I don't think they have any aspirations for other than being a long-term backup in the third round, albeit you do get Scooby right in the seventh round, who on your board was like a third-round value. So it does kind of even out. I think on balance they had a very, very good draft, but again, my sense of it is kind of leavened in a way that it wouldn't be if I didn't live here and weren't picturing other possibilities as well.
Yeah, well, let me be very clear. To steal a piece of terminology my wife uses, I absolutely nothing the Kessler pick.
Yeah.
I'm with you. He projects to be a backup. And my whole thing is you signed RG3. If it doesn't work, fine. You got enough picks to move up and sell the farm to get Deshaun Watson next year, who is the prize.
That's right. I'm looking forward to that.
A real quick thought on that. It seems to me that teams either get their franchise quarterback and build around that, or build around everything else and then go out and get their guy. And I think right now, picking outside linebackers, picking free safeties, picking offensive linemen, wide receivers, the whole bit, getting that team where they've got some pieces, it only makes sense to roll with RG3. See what happens. I'm not saying he's going to be – let's see what happens. Maybe a change of pace or whatever gets him on board. If it doesn't, if you get to the end of next season, they win 5 games, and you go, it was nice, he showed that he can play and get along with people, but it's just not going to be our long-term solution, then you go and you basically – I would have no problem if we heard that Sashi went to some other team that holds that number 1 pick next year and says, hey, we will give you a pick in every round to have number 1. After what Los Angeles Rams did, I don't think it's that far-fetched. And that's one way you can build a winner. So I'm fine with what they're doing.
I love your pessimism about having to trade with somebody to get the 1 pick next year, Jason. I'm not sure there's going to be a team in the league within 3 wins of the Browns. So we may have this locked down by Thanksgiving. We'll have to see how that plays out. But when you're looking at some of the losers, then nobody can stop us, unlike this year. Yeah, because this year we got screwed with that Tennessee and Rams deal because, again, Goff was going to be their guy, Goff was going to be my guy, and unfortunately it just didn't play out that way. And looking at the bottom 10 in the different rankings here, first, the ones based purely on the top 75 overall, point total assigned for that. 23 up to 32, the losers of the draft on that index. Number 23, Los Angeles. 24, New York Giants. 25, Denver. 26, New York Jets. 27, Atlanta. 28, Indianapolis. 29, Carolina. 30, Pittsburgh. 31, Kansas City. 32, New England. Spoiler alert, New England is going to be lowest on both of these because they didn't get a single player out of your top 75. In terms of filling needs in impactful areas in the top 75, we'll start at a tie for 22 because that's what there is. Tie for 22, Indianapolis and Philadelphia. Tie for 24, New York Giants and Oakland. Tie for 26, New York Jets and Pittsburgh. Tie for 28, Arizona and Atlanta. 30, Carolina. 31, Kansas City. 32, New England. Again, Kansas City only getting 1 player out of the top 75. They were 31 on both of those. New England was 32 on both of those. So if anybody's wondering how much the whole thing with the Deflategate thing hurt the Patriots this year, the answer would be quite a good amount. Now, Belichick's often a guy who goes off the board, too. So he had opportunities to take players in the top 75 on your list. He just didn't do it. But talk about some of the biggest losers you see coming out of the 2016 NFL Draft.
Oh, that's good. Well, like I said, it seems to be the inverse of what we're used to. The New England thing hurts because of the Deflategate pick. But the other thing, it just seems strange. A lot of these teams were so used to taking very solid draft value strategies. Seem to just go and get a guy.
Seemed like Pittsburgh did that once William Jackson was gone, right? It seemed like Pittsburgh kind of did that at cornerback.
Yeah, no, they. I'm pretty sure they had their heart set on 25, picking William Jackson. I think everybody thought he was actually going to be there. I did have a couple mocks that didn't have him, but Artie Burns, I like the physical base he's got. I like his upside, but that's a little steep. Green Bay did okay.
Mm-hmm.
Green Bay did what Green Bay does. Kansas City, I think, almost went to bed a little bit, though. Not crazy about what they did at all. I love, some of those picks after, say, 15, starting with Taylor Decker at 16, I thought made sense. But they're not the kind of thing to blow you away.
Well, it was very interesting because every year there's always like a couple of stragglers here. I was sitting there. I had the points assigned all the way around, except there was just 2 or 3 players left on your board that hadn't been taken yet. I think a couple of years ago, Chris Polk was on your list, and I think he actually went undrafted to Philadelphia. So sometimes you got to wait it out until afterwards. But I was sitting there just screaming for somebody to draft Scooby Wright so I could get this thing over with. Never in a million years did I think it would be the Browns because, again, this is where I have to, anecdotally from the gut, and I'll bring it full circle here as we're wrapping up, give them some credit because past regimes would have never done this. There's always one of those guys, right? You're sitting there waiting in the draft, and you're like everybody else on Twitter, why doesn't my team take him? Well, finally the Browns took that guy this year, and that's the first time I can ever remember anything like that happening, and they do deserve some credit for that.
Absolutely. I couldn't believe he was still there.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy, he's a little undersized for what you want, theoretically, in an outside linebacker. But, good grief, the value's insane, and it's probably likely to be at the top of that list of need and total points.
Well, the sense is I think he's going to play inside. And what's interesting is when you look at how he's a guy where the output is a lot better than the measurables, a name that's kind of a holy one around these parts is Chris Spielman. And it does kind of remind you a little bit of that in the same way as far as having a motor and some of these other intangibles that outweigh some of the measurables that you have with the guy. And, again, he has a chance to come in and be a real big fan favorite in this town. And, again, one of the biggest draft values of the entire process. But, again, value is the thing that we are always focused on, like a laser beam with the NFL draft and with fantasy football. So soon the talk will come to that, to looking ahead to the upcoming fantasy football season. We'll be breaking that down at FDH. But in the meantime, it was great taking this look back at the 2016 NFL Draft with you, my friend. Thanks so much for all of your great work with all of our player rankings, the top 75 overall, the rankings at every position, etc. People can still continue to revisit this on the front page of FantasyDraftHelp.com again, FantasyDraftHelp.com and 2016 Pro Football Draftology. Another great draft season from you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's always a pleasure. Best time of the year.
It is. It truly is. If you're a football fan, you got to love this process of looking ahead to the next year. It's always fun to do it with you, Jason. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge mini episode number 723.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the periodic table of elements.